There it is.
That was a short countdown for today. Happy Friday, everybody. We are super excited to be back with episode 2 of the new year. 2023, at least I can say, has been pretty fun so far. Andy, how's your Friday going?
It's pretty good. It's rainy outside in Seattle, but nice weekend. It's fresh.
Exactly. I always say this is my favorite way to start a Friday because we get to have some fun. And we have Victoria Garcia here with us. Victoria, how's your morning been so far?
Great so far. My husband brought me a delicious cup of coffee, and that's always a perfect way to start a morning.
Oh, yes. Okay,
Or
well,
with
my
you.
husband's still sleeping. I need to go harass him to bring me some coffee.
Yes, I Jeffrey is the cook of our home and he makes all the food related items. So I'm like, I need my coffee before this interview. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And I want to just read a brief intro and then I'll have you take it away. But for those of you who don't know Victoria, she is a bilingual public speaker, entrepreneur, and workshop facilitator who's passionate about educating and empowering minorities to close their wealth gap. A big topic, I think, to tackle in the next 30 minutes, but we will attempt to do it. And so, Victoria, give us a little background. What brought you into this space to want to help, minorities with growing their wealth and generational wealth? Give us the background, and however long that story needs to be is totally fine.
Well, again, I just want to express my gratitude to you, Abby, and you, Andy, for having me here. I'm so grateful to be able to share my story and share this message because I believe it's a really important message to share, and it's one that doesn't get shared often enough. So my journey to the right now started back in, I would say, 2018, 2019, when I was a marketing director. And the place where I was working at, I saw a lot of injustices, specifically focused towards the Hispanic community. I am a first generation Mexican American. This particular place where I was working at, I would say none of the labor force was Hispanic, Latino, or African American. And so the injustice in the workplace and the conversations I had privately with a lot of these people led me to understand that the topic of wealth and the topic of valuing ourselves and knowing our worth, especially as minorities, especially as first gens, is a very touchy, sensitive topic that does not get discussed nearly enough, and it does not get discussed within our communities, and definitely not in a private space. It's rarely brought up privately and almost never brought up publicly. Okay, so fast forward to 2020. The injustices just got worse, and I was just starting to see all sorts of things within my work environment that I wasn't okay with. And it was around, I would say, summer 2020 that I think I was just reading some article online during my lunch break, and it was talking about the Latina wage gap, and that basically of all the racial groups in the United States, Latinas are the ones who have the biggest wage gap, meaning we are the ones who are earning basically the least amount of money of all the racial groups in the United States. And I was, well, A, I was horrified. And then B, I was like, wait, what? Why? Like, immediately I was like, why? So many of the Latinas I know are incredibly intelligent, educated, hardworking, loyal. A lot of us, myself included, are bilingual and bicultural. So I was like, in my mind, I had always seen my bilingualism, I had always viewed my biculturalism as an asset, like making me doubly valuable to an employer, making me doubly valuable to my clients. And I was like, but we're earning the least amount of money. I'm like, this like literally logically does not make sense in my head. So anyway, I kind of went down that rabbit hole. I was like, what other articles are out there? Who's performing this research? Where are they getting the data? Is this true? And so then as I started having more private conversations with women within my job at that point, I realized if not all of these women had never asked for a raise. It had never even occurred to them to ask for a raise.
Mm.
A 401k plan was not something my company offered, nor was it something that anyone was talking about. Investments were also not something that was talked about within the company. And so I was like, oh my gosh, no wonder our wealth gap is so large. We're not even having discussions about money, even with our friends and not our family members either. And so anyway, I launched Latinas Who Dare in 2020. Like, I think it was like July, August. Andy was actually part of that launch, as a way to not only spread awareness about the wage gap issue, particularly affecting Latinas specifically, but also to help these women do something about it. Because what I told my community was like, look, will probably take many, many, many years. We will probably be like long gone before the wage gap is actually closed. But I was like, during our lifetime, we can do something about it. We can create awareness about it so that the next generation, so that our daughters, our granddaughters don't have to live through what we had to live through, right? And so I was like, in the meantime, the wealth gap closes, or the wage gap closes. I was like, why don't we do our absolute best to close our own wage gap by utilizing the funds that we generate from our businesses and reinvesting those funds, learning, like educating ourselves about investments, educating ourselves about maybe investing in real estate. What is the stock market all about? Like utilizing those extra funds to build wealth. And so it's just like a concept that I came up with because it's kind of what I was doing. And it was what was helping my own family build that generational wealth that I hope to one day pass on to my son. And then it just kind of skyrocketed and it went all over the place from there. So I started hosting events for Latinas specifically so they could come and sell their products, sell their services, talk about what they do as business owners. And then we all started kind of hiring each other, like within our own community. I guess I kind of formed like almost like a BNI group without even like making it officially a BNI group. It was just kind of like, oh, you need an attorney. This girl over here, Cristina Uribe, she's an attorney. Or, you need this legal service over here. Montserrat has this legal service. So we just kind of started connecting each other and supporting each other so that we could help build wealth within our little community. And so anyway, that was the initiation. And this led to me wanting to host a live event to discuss this topic on a wider scale and take it beyond just helping Latinas close the wage gap, because I realized the wealth gap is real and it's not just plaguing Latinas.
I mean, that's an amazing story behind what you do. And I think it's amazing that it started with your own journey of, hey, I wanted to create this wealth for myself. So you're like, hey, I've been there. I wanted to create this. What are some of the other groups that you also feel like maybe could benefit from working on this, having a safe place to ask questions? Because there isn't always that in the financial world.
Yeah. Groups are just other groups of minorities who are first generation Americans, regardless of what country they come from, regardless of their background. Because obviously, if your parents were raised in a different country, like their country of origin, that is how they're going to raise you. It's going to take you as a child a while to figure out the system and navigate the system on your own if you don't have multiple generations going back who know how the American economic system works or know how the American education system works. Like both of my parents were born and raised in Mexico. They worked there. That's where they went to school. Like they didn't know anything about how things work here in the US. So that was something that I myself needed to navigate. And so I think other communities who can relate to that experience, to the first gen experience, were like me, they're in their 20s, 30s, starting to get married, have babies, and they're just like, oh my gosh, there's expenses left and right. I don't know how to build generational wealth. This is not something I was taught by my parents or by my family. I need to figure this out kind of on my own, but that's hard to do. So I want to make sure that I can curate a community that we represented groups, we first geners can go to, so that when we need resources, we can go to that community for those resources, whether it's education or otherwise.
And Andy, I want to make sure you get to ask your questions too, but I have another one. And tell us about this event that you're hosting. I know we put the link if people want to check it out below, so you can click on it. But give us a little preview of what people could expect.
I'll be hosting this event at the Clayton, which is a hotel and members club in Cherry Creek, Denver. And the event is titled Heartfelt Wealth. And I did that very specifically. I did that on purpose. And it's because typically anything associated with emotions or with your heart center is not associated with wealth, and it's not associated with money. Typically, money or the topic of finances is something that's very headspace. It's something very cerebral. It's something very logical. But as I've gotten older, I've realized actually money is extremely emotional. It's a very, very sensitive and emotional topic. And there's so many layers to unpack, especially for minorities, especially for underrepresented groups. There's so many layers of trauma even. And it was something I was noticing within myself. And I was like, why? My entrepreneurial journey started back in 2016. And that was kind of when I recognized my own trauma and my own beliefs about money and success and what that means. And am I worthy? And who am I to show up as a Latina entrepreneur in this highly male dominated space where I didn't see anyone who looked like me in the entrepreneurial spaces back in 2016. And so because there were all these very complicated layers to unpack, and it took me so many years to unpack those layers kind of by myself, I was like, man, what if I could just like condense everything I've learned over the course of 10 plus years down to one seminar where I can help people more from a holistic point of view, from an emotional point of view, from a heartfelt point of view, because you can't truly really build and sustain wealth, whether that's through entrepreneurship or otherwise, if you have a lot of layers that you have not recognized and unpacked. I'll give you a really basic example. If you have not figured out what your parents believed about money, like for example, what your mother believed, what your father believed, what they taught you about what does it mean to build wealth, what does success mean, is what did your mom teach you about money, what did your dad teach you about money? Like these are really sensitive conversations to have, but they are absolutely necessary if you have any desire to build true wealth during your lifetime, and certainly to pass that wealth on to your children.
Right.
My portion of the event, and then I'm also going to bring in speakers who are what's the word, like disrupting, challenging the image or the narrative of what a wealthy person looks like, if that makes any sense. So for example, one of my dear friends, she is literally the only Latina real estate investor that I know. She's been she's been very successful at it, but she herself had to own her power and be like, yes, I am a Latina real estate investor. I've been wildly successful at doing this. And she recently, like literally just last year, started to identify herself as a successful real estate investor because it took her a while to assume that title. And so anyway, she's going to be one of the speakers that I'm going to bring in to talk about her experience as a Latina real estate investor. Another really good friend of mine, he came from Mexico City, started working here in Colorado as a dishwasher, and now owns several restaurants throughout Colorado valued at multiple millions of dollars. And so he's another example of a person who's disrupting the image of wealth. And these people to me are so incredibly inspiring, and I want their stories to be heard and told.
Sounds like some good guests maybe for Disruptors Live. I don't know.
Happy to make the connection.
I think that's amazing that you're putting that together. And, I was actually reading an interesting book that kind of made me think of what we're talking about called The Psychology of Money. And it talks about like the difference between being rich and being wealthy. And I think people confuse the two a lot. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Who wrote that book? I've never heard of it. I should probably read
Oh,
it.
let me Google it. Stand by. But I
All
will
right.
bring you a copy. The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel. Really good book. I would highly recommend it.
I love reading all about money. I've always been fascinated by the topic. I think because as a child, I was a very curious child, and I loved asking people questions. I went to school for broadcasting, so I love asking questions. And I noticed even as a child that if I asked questions about money, people immediately like shifted and got weird, and like people's energy changed. And I'm like, why? It's just in my mind, I'm like, it's just money. Why are people getting so fidgety and weird? And I noticed specifically that that energy shift was very prominent in I mean, I guess men and women, but the women in my life, the women in my life got very uncomfortable and almost like, no, we don't talk about that. And I'm like, why don't we talk about that? We deal with money every single day. That's like saying we don't talk about water, like we all drink water. So anyway, as a child, I became very fascinated about this topic that seemed very taboo. But anyway, Abby, back to your question, you asked the difference between being rich and being wealthy. I'm going to share with you my interpretation. This is how I've come to understand it. This is what I believe. I know that different people believe different things. This is just what I believe. Um, Being wealthy is a of being well-rounded and whole. To me, it's a holistic standpoint. It's a holistic place of being, because while you can be rich and have money, you through your health, or you can be lacking wealth through your friendships, because there are obviously different forms of wealth. Yes, of course, money is one of those forms of wealth. In my opinion, it is not the only form of wealth, because to understand, true wealth comes from being wealthy in the categories that matter to you. So if building wealth through friendships, through community matters to you, then that is absolutely a valid form of wealth. If having a healthy body and a healthy mind is a form of wealth for you, then cultivating that in addition to cultivating your money, that's another form of wealth. And so that is something that has become motto. That is something that has become like my guiding star, my northern star. Is if there is an area of my life where I'm feeling poor in, then I ask myself, is that an area of my life that I care to cultivate wealth in? So for example, there was a period in my life where I was very lonely. I was busy raising my son. Nobody in my circle had children. I became a mom very early in life. And so I felt very poor in my relationships. I felt very poor in my friendships. However, I felt extremely rich in my marriage. I had a beautiful, fulfilling, I mean, still do, but at that point in my life, I felt rich in my marriage, very poor in my friendships, and also very poor in my finances at that time. So throughout my lifetime, I'm almost 34. I've come to figure out what are the different categories of wealth that matter to me, and how can I cultivate more wealth in those categories that I care about.
I love that. I feel like that kind of aligns with what they talk about in the book too. But I'll have to, so next time I see you, bring you a copy. I won't bring you mine because I've like underlined every page, but a new one.
So,
Andy, I feel like we got to hear from you over there. I know you have great questions always up your sleeve.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot about Victoria, so I kind of like to just listen. But one of the things that I'm curious about, I know that you really like to work closely with these groups of women, and now you're kind of expanding to all people, Latino and other minorities, and anyone who's experiencing lack mindset financially. But as you start doing these events, you've talked before about hoping that this could become a national thing someday. And I think a lot of operators that are coaches or authors or these kind of things want to start making courses and podcasts and all the things to reach the masses. You have a great message and you hope to build a framework that millions of people could use someday, but you also create really, really amazing experiential in-person events in Denver with, 30 to 50 people at a time. What is your plan for how this might grow? Do you think the event is the format where you could take these events around the country eventually? Maybe that still has that human to human touch versus virtual products?
Question. Yeah, I've given that a lot of thought. And obviously, as both of you know, because both of you are business owners yourselves, like we can't like multiply ourselves. It'd be amazing if we could, but we can't. And so I have thought about, like, what would be the best way to be able to continue to share this message beyond Colorado? And hopefully one day internationally. That's always kind of been a dream of mine. I'm like, how can I make it to Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, Ecuador? Like, how can I make it to all these South American, other Spanish speaking countries? And I guess what comes to mind is finding people within these that already live in these communities, that already live in these countries or these cities, who are also interested or passionate about this topic, and maybe launching communities throughout the states, or internationally speaking, where we can have like little wealth hubs in different places, so that these topics can become more mainstream and more talked about, and these layers can just begin to soften and release these layers of trauma. I mean, these layers of like money trauma and financial trauma. I mean, if you haven't seen Encanto, that movie talks, that is a very good movie that represents all the layers of trauma that a lot of Latinos experience. And so, to answer your question, Andy, I think that feels like the most organic way for me to continue to build this community in a way that is sustainable, and in a way that I'm not going to completely lose my mind, because I'm just one person. In addition to that, I think creating something online is just like, it's one of those no-brainer things, because we do live in a digital era, clearly, and we can leverage platforms, and we can leverage things like Zoom, or these digital platforms, to continue spreading messages, creating awareness, and ultimately creating progress and evolution and transformation, which is, I believe, why we're all here. We're not here to stagnate. I think we're definitely here to evolve and transform and just become a better version of ourselves every year.
I
One of
love
the
that.
things that one of the things that I really loved, as Victoria mentioned, I was at her first event 2 more years ago now, and you have several events that are in Spanish, or people are obviously speaking Spanish. I speak enough to understand. I listen a lot better than I talk, but with people from all these different backgrounds, I've been around people that spoke English as a second language for my entire life, but I'd never been in a room with 50 different women from different countries that are all speaking the same language, with the exception of the one gal from Brazil. That was just a whole nother thing. But I walked up to Victoria at one point and I said, that girl over there with the blonde hair, I really like how she talks. I understand her better. And she said, oh, that's because she's from Colombia. They enunciate more and they talk slower. And I was like, oh, perfect. Those are my people over there. But I'd never
Yes.
been around that.
Um, very diverse. I mean, Spanish is a beautiful and almost like complicated language, because it depends on the country. Is the accent, is like the different, what is it, like the different slang words, even within just Mexico. Like, this is not even talking about South America, just within Mexico there's so much diversity of language, just within my own country. So yes, we have a very delicious and juicy culture.
Right? Not as exciting as English. I feel like you'll go to different places, sure, people will have different words, but it never sounds as nice.
There are definitely those of us who are bilingual, and I know I do this all the time. I speak Spanglish. I mean, if someone's bilingual, my brain immediately switches, like code switches to Spanglish, because there are some words or some emotions that can be absolutely better expressed in Spanish. So I leverage that as much as I possibly can.
And you have a whole separate business besides just empowering women, to learn more about their finances and close that wealth gap. Can you tell us a little bit more about the ceremonial cacao? And I think that is so interesting too.
That whole business, I would say the idea for that business started back in 2019, but I didn't launch it officially until May 2021. So I sell artisan cacao blends that are meant to be consumed as food and as a health beverage. So my husband and I created 3 cacao blends because I discovered cacao as food and cacao as medicine back in Costa Rica, because typically chocolate has been introduced into the public as candy, as a treat. But when I tried raw chocolate back in Costa Rica in 2019, I was blown away by how good I felt. Like I can't explain it. I just felt incredibly uplifted. I felt my mind felt clear. I was in a really good mood. And so when I went down the rabbit hole of like exploring all the health benefits of cacao, I was like, oh my gosh, this is excuse me, this is an incredible food that so few people know about from the perspective of, again, food and medicine. So Jeff, my husband and I, we began to play with different blends here at home, and certainly during 2020 when we just had a bunch of time on our hands, we ordered ingredients from a bunch of different parts. So we ordered cacao from a bunch of different countries and just started playing with different blends at home until we created 3 blends that we really, really loved. And so we began to just share some of these blends with friends and family, and just started asking them, what did they think? What did they feel? Did they like the flavor? And then in May 2021, we took our 3 best blends and launched them, and now we sell them throughout Colorado. I've hosted, I don't even know, dozens of cacao ceremonies at this point. And cacao, for me personally, has been absolutely fundamental to my own healing journey. Build wealth and build success from a healed place, as opposed to a place of just complete fear and scarcity, which is where I was, 11 years ago, back when I had my son, and I was like, oh my gosh, I wasn't prepared to be a mom, and now I have this child to take care of. And so we were operating, my partner and I were operating from a place of a lot of fear, a lot of lack, because we had a lot of healing to do. And then again, so everything I'm doing, starting my cacao business, these things, although they are separate energetically, because they're just 2 totally different things I'm doing, they're still connected and they're still intermingled. So yeah, that's, and our business is called Apapacho Cacao.
Amazing. And where can people find that? Give us the shameless plugs, the websites, social media.
Instagram, thank you. Our Instagram is apapacho_cacao, and then the website is drinkapapacho.com. And I know it's a long, interesting word, so I will spell it out. So it's A, and then Papa, Papa, and then Cho, Cho. A Papa Cho is the website.
Awesome. And anything exciting? What are like the most exciting plans you got going on in this first quarter of the new year? Obviously, you have the event, which we touched on. I don't know if there's anything more exciting than that.
Taking up a lot of my time and energy right now. So I was accepted into a business accelerator last year. It's on behalf of an organization called E for All. I believe E stands for entrepreneurship. E for All, based out of Longmont, Colorado. So we kicked off our accelerator just this week, and so that to me is something really exciting. I believe it's a 3-month accelerator where they're going to pair all of us who got accepted in with mentors, and so I'm going to meet with my mentor or mentors, I think once a week for 90 minutes, and they're going to help me with growth for my business. And so I'm really excited for that, because there's always a lot to learn as a business owner, and I'm grateful for the support that I've received through E4All, and the support that I will be receiving through these mentors. So that's my first quarter adventure.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, we got all the links below if you're watching this on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, all the same links. You can check out Victoria's events, website, all that good stuff. Andy, any final words of wisdom from you? You've been quiet this morning.
Yeah, Victoria, I think maybe a great thing to stick the landing would be, would you explain real quick the meaning of appapacho and how it represents the relationship with yourself and maybe even your bank account?
Abby, that was a great question. Okay. Apapacho is a word that is derived from the language that the Aztecs spoke. So in Mexico, Spanish was not spoken originally. Mexico got colonized. And so before the colonization, Nahuatl was one of the ancient indigenous languages. Apapacho is a word derived from that ancient indigenous language. So apapacho means to hug, hold, embrace, and love from a very sacred place, like within your heart and your soul. And I cannot give or receive a fake apapacho. If you are giving an apapacho to someone, it's always genuine. And I always tell people, I'm like, it's if you, very similar to like you just loving on your dog or you just loving on your child or embracing someone or an animal or whatever that you really, really love and just expressing that sacred form of affection or receiving that sacred form of affection. So these are my beliefs. I believe that one of the foundations to building anything meaningful during your lifetime is a sense of self-reverence and self-love. And those were two things I did not have for myself for many, many, many years. And so cacao is a plant medicine. And cacao as a plant medicine allowed me to love myself, respect myself from a place of just authentic expression as opposed to a place of vanity. I think so many women and so many people fear being judged as narcissists, if that makes sense, for loving themselves. And so a lot of people love themselves, but you cannot create anything from a place of not self-love. So anyway, I always tell people that when our intention is that when someone drinks a cup of our cacao, that as they drink the cacao, they feel that energy of an apapacho that we like to refer to as a hug in a mug. So we hope that you feel hugged when you're drinking our cacao and ultimately begin to cultivate that sense of self-love.
Well, very well explained. I'm sold. I'm going to go order some right now.
Thanks.
Victoria, thank you again for joining us. And Andy, thank you for always your great questions. We will see everybody next week, and I hope everyone has an amazing weekend.